I'm excited to be joined by Sailing Merrim today, Director of Product Marketing. She'll be covering our agenda, which is packed. So for now, I'll turn it over to her to get started.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning or good afternoon. And yes, I'm also stuck at home. So if you hear occasional dog bark, that's my dog seeing a squirrel. So my name is Sailing, and today I will talk to you about FortIEDR. And many of you know we have an exciting promotion going on, and Amy will take you through that as well. So first, let me take you through the endpoint security market. And a little bit about me. Before joining Fortinet, I spent about 10 years working at various endpoint security vendors, including Kaspersky, McAfee, and CISOs. So I feel like that in the past 10 years, I've witnessed a tremendous market transformation that is in this second largest security market. And a lot of it is really a tribute to, number one, is the accelerating threat landscape, especially ransomware and other malware. And this morning, right before the webinar, I was just reading Verizon data breach report. And the ransomware is especially worrisome for education and local government and public sector. So in education, 80% of malware are ransomware, and for public sector, that accounts for 60%. So obviously, people have a lot of breach anxiety and ransomware worries. And another thing is we work from home, and based on research, when people working from home, 2/3 of a company cannot really adequately monitor the off-network endpoint and not really able to protect them fully. Is really rely on the user to be vigilant, and also you need to have a good security on the endpoint. And then third is a skill shortage. Not only people, it's really a compound and the result of the threat landscape. So you have people, and the people need to continue to study, and also a lot of us are hiring kids from fresh out of college, and they all need to be trained and making sure they don't get burned out because it's an intense job. And because of that, what we have seen is there's a convergence. And as I mentioned, I basically lived through this convergence. You see many of you representing have traditional endpoint protection product on your line card, and that this market is highly penetrated with 90% penetration. And then about 8 years ago, you start seeing various variant of next-gen vendors. So some are the machine learning AV, and pretty much all this has been folded into the EPP stack. And then we also see EDR solution that originally was used by highly trained incident response team that come to an organization after they have a confirmed breach. And often now, because the breach happens so often, organizations just decide to keep them. And when these two sector converge, what people are looking for is integrated solution that is essentially a combination of EPP and EDR that gives you the ability to prevent malware, that's file-based malware, and the ability to detect and block malicious activity. This will be typically a fileless attack or attack using PowerShell or a script or a malicious or weaponized Office document. And in addition to detecting it, you also want to have the ability to help investigating, respond, and remediate, and essentially bring back business to the normal state. And when I see this, this is from the, so earlier that slide was on the supply side. This is from the demand side. So if you think about how CISO think about this, what they are thinking is the malware actors are basically up the ante, and they are stepping up their games. You can buy fileless attack, you can rent a ransomware service in a dark market pretty cheaply. And that's essentially, they are on the level 4 kind of attack. They can be evasive, they're using malware, they are using fileless malware. And on the enterprise side, they have to step up their game to defend And at this stage, they need to enhance their malware protection maturity and essentially going from level 2 to level 3 and level 4. And that is needing EDR technology. So according to Enterprise Research Group, 45% of companies are either engaging in an active project or interested in deploying EDR technology. And I use the word technology is because it's a technology that people want to have integrated solution. And then on top of that, on top of this 45% interest in EDR technology, almost over half of enterprise continuously evaluating their endpoint security annually. And I know you notice that a lot of time when you sell endpoint security, people only buy 1-year license. And if you think about this, to evaluate endpoint security, typically it takes about 3 months, and then you take a few months to deploy. So if you do the math, you are under 6 months away from any endpoint project anywhere. So if you pick up the phone, 50% of them say, yes, I'm looking for EDR. I am evaluating my endpoint security. And the other 50% would just say, yeah, I just deployed 3 months ago. Call me in 2 months. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about EDR technology. EDR technology has been on the market for about 8 years, and we have seen the first generation manual EDR, and now we are progressing to the automated, and because people are requesting automation. So let me explain to you why. So in the old days, not old days, about 3 years ago, whenever you hear there's a confirmed data breach, one thing that's disturbing is you hear that the attackers are dwelling in the organization for up to 190 days, like a couple of years, and they just slowly siphon off the information. And that's because in the security process, you need to have continuous monitoring. You have the ability, you need to detect, enrich, validate, and block the threat, and then search your environment. So all this is done manually. And as a result, when your defense is highly focusing on prevention, once the attacker bypasses the prevention stack, they can hide there for months or even years. And the first generation EDR, their number one contribution is reduce the time to detect. They can basically reduce it under 24 hours, and right now that is a hopeful thing. 2/3 of attack can be detected now under 24 hours. That's great. However, the first generation EDR is operating under the assumption that you are already compromised, so we're turning over every single stone to find indicator of compromise or indicator of attack and send you alert. So the flip side of this is their hypervigilance is give you a ton of alerts, and you need to manually triage and manually contain this threat. And that adds a couple more hours and contributing to alert fatigue. And again, when you think about this, detecting under 24 hours, if there's no alert backlog, usually the backlog will take your SOC team several days to go through. And once they start triaging things and contain confirmed threat, it takes a couple more hours. Just think about that. Is that fast enough for ransomware? And this is why FortIEDR is a second generation EDR technology. And we are mindful of the fact that attackers are going to move faster and faster, especially ransomware attack. And this is why we come up with the ability to detect and diffuse in real time. So you can see the example on the bottom. This is a very typical fileless attack. It uses Microsoft Word. It uses Word to trigger macro and then called PowerShell, and then PowerShell start reaching out for CNC communication. So Microsoft and PowerShell are all signed application, but the behavior is off. The behavior looks really strange. So when this process is making a request to say, hey, I want to connect to this IP address, we can block this malicious action in real time and then send it to our playbook to do thorough response, for example, terminate process and other things. And in the meantime, we also know essentially what we are doing is when we see something suspicious, we race to the exit door. But we also took the address because we sit on the OS level. When the process is making a request, it has to give us a destination address. We take that IP address, we can share across our security fabric. And I'll talk a little bit more about our fabric integration. But let's continue on this thought about FortIEDR. So FortIEDR is a result of our acquisition of InSilo, and that came to Fortinet family and that came to Fortinet family at the end of last year. And InSilo has been in business for about 5 years, and it really enjoyed the second to market advantage. It has the ability. So the founder has been watching the first generation manual EDR and know that the detection and response, there's a time gap and require manual response. So they designed the solution based on the CARTA methodology. So it focused on prevention, detection, and detection with real-time blocking of malicious action, and then use Playbook to automate the response and give you the ability to remote remediate, and then also go back and help you predict, essentially actively reduce attack surface. So the common theme with FortiEDR is just like EDR solution, we're giving you visibility. We give you visibility of your attack surface. We give you visibility of running processes, malicious action. But on top of that, we take another step. We take action. We don't just raise alarm and say, we see things, now do something. Now we see stuff, we will take care of it for you, and we will allow companies to set up policy to preemptively take control. So let me take you step by step. So first one is you need to reduce attack surface, and we can discover not just application, we can discover rogue devices, unmanaged devices, IoT devices, along with vulnerabilities and ratings. And we give you the policy control, so you can set a policy to say, if the application has a vulnerability, severe vulnerability, restrict outbound communication. So for example, I work from home, I use PDF all the time, and if my Adobe Reader has a vulnerability, I haven't downloaded the patch, what it can do is it will still allow me to read PDF. Like this morning, I was reading the Verizon threat breach report. But if I open a weaponized PDF and compromise my Adobe Reader, and the process is making outbound call to traffic my stolen crypto, the SOC analyst level 1. I may not know what it is. It gave me a clear hint and say what process hallowing means, and it mapped to the MITRE technique and tell me which portion of the attack it is, and also give me a very clear direction to say, okay, when you see this, go to the executable file to the parent process, do this. So it gives a SOC level 1 analyst a very clear guidance to help them do more with and without having to escalate the issue. And then here, this is what I call the attack graph. So this attack is very complicated. It's very typical ransomware or fileless attack. It spawn multiple processes, and you can see we have all the attacks, all these indicators, all the detection, and we will block the final result, which is executing the ransomware. So we block the action, and when you see that red dot, that means it's safe. The process is not terminated, but we block the malicious action in real time. And then depends on how you set up your playbook. If you set up the playbook to automatically delete file, cleaned up, rollback changes, will do all that for you. Okay, so earlier I talked about how we classify events and we also talk a little bit about automate the response using Playbook. So this is an example of setting up Playbook. And one thing I like about this solution is when we set up a Playbook, we have the concept not just of the event classification, but also end user group. So for example, the C-level The C-level user may not be the same as marketing people, right? So for example, if we see a inconclusive event happening on the executive, maybe what we want to do is we don't want to isolate his device because that might be career limiting, but we might want to do is open a ticket and have IT people give a call, or we can even, what we can also do is we can lock him off the device. And because potentially we see something weird because the malicious action, like the inconclusive, most dangerous part would be what if somebody has account takeover scenario. So in this case, maybe we'll lock the user off the device and ask the user to re-authenticate himself or herself to the services, maybe re-logging on to Office 365, re-logging on to your Outlook, and then we can make sure that this is real, this is the actual user and not the attacker. Another example will be manufacturing. So a lot of time with our customer, they would just say, hey, if you see an attack, I want you to mitigate it, block the attack, but do not isolate my machine. I need my factory floor to continue to run. I want to make sure my conveyor belt never stops. So this is what you can do with the automated response playbook. And if you can see on the bottom, it's very faint. There are two security fabric icons here. So what we are doing is FortIEDR is part of the security fabric. And for example, if we detect a device that is that's potentially compromised, we can move it to a high security group using FortiNAC. Or you can have a much more granular isolation policy. So not just turning that machine into a brick. You can say, okay, I'm going to move you to a VLAN where you can only have internet-only access, or I'm going to move you to a remediation VLAN. And so you can have much more granular policy basing on our FortiNAC. And we can also integrate with FortiGate, as I mentioned earlier, when we block a malicious processes that is using PowerShell and try to call a CNC. We take that IP address, we can give that IP address to FortiGate and instantly, automatically change the firewall policy to block that outbound, to block that destination IP universally. And this way you protect all machines on the network, regardless it has FortiEDR or not. And that's especially useful when you have IoT devices that cannot have agent installed. So as I mentioned earlier, we are working from home and we have teleworker. And then when you have teleworker, the security consideration is you want to make sure your endpoint is resilient, because now I'm very mindful that I'm working from home. It's not like the old days. I can just walk down the hall, go to IT or call IT. It's like, hey, my computer is running really slow. Can you have a look? And if my computer is really compromised, they could just re-image it for me. Now that is just making everything much harder. So you want to make sure your endpoint defense is resilient. Number one, you want visibility, and you want continuous visibility, not just about attack surface. You want to know what process is running. You want to know all this thing that's unusual. And then coming back to attack surface, when we detect things that is potential vulnerability on your endpoint, we want you to have the ability to do a preemptive control, to actively take the action to reduce the attack surface, not manually patching, not manually closing things up. It should be automatic. So this is self-protect. And if something does slip by your prevention stack, does slip by your AV, and is now running, you want to have the ability to automatically block the malicious action and stop the ransomware encryption, if you will. That's, I call it self-defense. And then once you have confirmed malicious threat on your endpoint, you want the ability to let the endpoint to remotely remediate itself, clean up, roll back the changes, clean up the registry, and return to a good state without having to re-image the machine. And that's called self-healing. And I think this capability is important, especially important and appreciated when you have people working from home and working remotely. So I can tell all the thing, and I know I'm in marketing, and you guys, a lot of you are are sales engineers, so you want proof. So I am really excited. Last Friday, I got the best gift. FortiNet participated in, we participated in AD comparative, and this is a real world protection test. And they emulate real world situation, putting a lot of different drive-by download, malicious website, and FortiNet is now #1 in this test. We block 100% of the malicious attacks. They are web-borne or malware, so it's 100% with with the lowest false positive. Additionally, we also participate in NSS Lab, and we got the highest rating, which is AA. They also have a AAA, but nobody got there. They are very, very strict. So another thing is when we talk about not having enough resources and having resources but not sure what to do, or not having 24/7 SOC, and FortiEDR, FortiNet also offer FortiResponder services, and that's a service on our price list that you can resell. So in addition to reselling a solution, you can now resell our services. So we have two services that's under this umbrella. One is managed detection and response, and the other one is incident response service. So managed detection and response essentially is it's a service that's on top of FortiEDR. We can do the alert triage, especially, and we can help you examine incidents. So earlier I showed you that for malicious and suspicious, they are clear. What if it's inconclusive? We are not sure. We see a remote desktop services. We are not sure if it's legitimate IT tool, or if it's attackers using RDP to attack my computer. And our MDR service can help you, making sure that we examine every single clue to make sure that we escalate or de-escalate the event accordingly. And just give you a little more context. So what it does is we have a 24-hour team, and we continuously monitor the threat. We do active threat hunting in your environment, and we triage the alert. FortiEDR is an EDR solution. We do have alert, even though the malicious action is blocked. It still generates an alert, and if you don't have a playbook that takes care of it, we can take care of that for you. And the benefit is a lot of company, and even very large company, we have worked with company with tens of thousands of employees, and they don't have a SOC. They have 3 poor IT security guys and can hardly get any sleep, so we can help them out. And as I mentioned earlier, not many companies can afford a 24/7 SOC, and we can help them. We can help them out by providing additional resources. And also this just reduces analyst burnout, knowing there's another highly trained professional there that we have your back. So as I mentioned earlier, it used to be 2 separate markets, EPP and EDR, and now enterprises are looking for a combination, EPP plus EDR. And remember, in the old days when EPP is all on prevention, when we know, or when the vendors know that AD can do only so much, they start adding bell and whistles to block it at the attack vector level, for example, web filtering, or protecting the data like DLP or encryption. All this now is become a secondary. If people really want it, they can have an add-on. And that's exactly what we can do today. FortiEDR, as I mentioned, is an EPP plus EDR. And many of you often ask me, well, what about FortiClient? FortiClient can absolutely coexist with FortiEDR. Typically, we sell FortiClient as a part of the FortiGate attachment, because the network security team that is managing FortiGate, they really like the endpoint visibility, knowing exactly where client is connected to, what subnet does it belong to, and can use FortiEDR for endpoint compliance control as part of our zero trust network access. FortiClient is also a VPN agent, And it also has web filtering and SaaS control that is using the same category as our FortiGate. And these two solutions can absolutely coexist. And just real quick, I'm looking at time. I need to, so I think many of you will know any industry that care about security should absolutely look into FortiEDR, but we are especially successful in manufacturing, retail, and state local government. And in the interest of time, I will just share with you one case study. This is a very mature organization in manufacturing. They are using legacy EPP, and they know EPP is not enough, so they add on a first-generation EDR. And they know it's noisy, has a lot of alerts, so they put in audit mode. And they also know they don't have people to triage the alerts, so they hired an outsourced SOC team. And so the CISO basically look at this and say, I really need to consolidate my solution. I want a single solution, even though I trust that my current setup is really good. So this is back in Silo time. They talked to in Silo and put in POC, and then they found out that the prevention failed. We actually found crypto mining in 30,000 endpoint. And so the EPP vendor is like, yeah, it's prevention. Sometimes we miss. And they talked to the EDR vendor. It was like, yeah, we saw it. We have the telemetry. It's in one of the several thousand alerts. And then went to the MDR vendor. The MDR vendor say, our SLA is 72 hours. The threat is only in your environment for 30 hours. So if wasn't for InSilo / FortiEDR, we probably would catch it tomorrow. And needless to say, they consolidate to FortiEDR and reduce the risk exposure, and have one single vendor that provides prevention, detection, and managed detection and response. So I'm going to skip others, and I can share the deck with you. One thing I do want to point out is FortiEDR, when you talk to customer, a lot of things that's really frustrating is as an EPP vendor stepping up their game, adding on EDR capability, what you will find out is a newer version of their tool will say, we don't support anything older than Windows 7. And a lot of companies, especially critical infrastructure, they still have devices that's using Windows XP, Windows Server 2003, and you end up having this mishmash deployment that say, okay, for my XP or even air gap situation, I am going to use your old version of signature-based solution. And then for my office worker, I can use the newer generation. And you end up having two management console. And that just create a lot more pain. And FortiEDR is the only next-gen endpoint detection and response capability, has endpoint detection and response capability, post-execution protection, and it's integrated with Fortinet. And just a quick differentiator, one thing that people really appreciate is we can deploy, this is native cloud solution, we can deploy cloud, on-prem, or hybrid. So we can even work in a completely air-gapped facility. And we have the widest OS support, including legacy Windows. Thank you, and stay safe, stay healthy.